Hello, you perfectly lovely muggles. My name is Sarah, and I'm reading from Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone by J.K. Rowling. We're up to chapter 15, The Forbidden Forest. Things couldn't have been worse. Filch took them down to Professor McGonagall's study on the first floor, where they sat and they waited without saying a word to each other. Hermione was trembling. Excuses, alibis, and wild cover-up stories chased each other around Harry's brain, each more feeble than the last. He couldn't see how they were going to get out of trouble this time. They were cornered. How could they have been so stupid as to forget the cloak? There was no reason on earth that Professor McGonagall would accept for their being out of bed and creeping around the school in the dead of night, let alone being up the tallest astronomy tower, which was out of bounds except for classes. Add Norbert and the invisibility cloak, and they might as well be packing their bags already. Had Harry thought things couldn't have been worse? He was wrong. When Professor McGonagall appeared, she was leading Neville. "Harry!" Neville burst out the moment he saw the other two. "I was trying to find you to warn you. I heard Malfoy saying that he was going to catch you, and he said that you had a..." Harry shook his head violently to shut Neville up. But Professor McGonagall had seen. She looked more likely to breathe fire than Norbert as she towered over the three of them. "I would never have believed it if of any of you. Mr. Filch said that you were up the astronomy tower. It's 1 o'clock in the morning. Explain yourselves." It was the first time that Hermione had ever failed to answer a teacher's question. She was staring at her slippers, still as a statue. "I think that I have a good idea of what has been going on," said Professor McGonagall. "It doesn't take a genius to work it out. You fed Draco Malfoy some cock and bull story about a dragon, trying to get him out of bed and into trouble. I've already caught him. I suppose you think it's funny that Longbottom here heard the story and believed it too." Harry caught Neville's eye and tried to tell him without words that this wasn't true, because Neville was looking stunned and hurt. Poor blundering Neville. Harry knew what it must have cost him to try and find them in the dark to warn them. "I am disgusted," said Professor McGonagall. "4 students out of bed in one night. I have never heard of such a thing before. You, Miss Granger, I thought you would have more sense. And as for you, Mr. Potter, I thought Gryffindor meant more to you than this. All 3 of you will receive detentions. Yes, you too, Mr. Longbottom. Nothing gives you the right to walk around the school at night, especially these days. It is very dangerous. And 50 points will be taken from Gryffindor." 50? Harry gasped. They would lose the lead he'd won at the last Quidditch match. 50 points each, said Professor McGonagall, breathing heavily through her long pointed nose. "Professor, please, but you can't." "Don't tell me what I can and can't do, Potter. Now, get back to bed, all of you. I have never been more ashamed of Gryffindor students." 150 points lost. That put Gryffindor in last place. In one night, they had ruined any chance that Gryffindor had had for the House Cup. Harry felt as though the bottom had dropped out of his stomach. How could he ever make up for this? Harry didn't sleep all night. He could hear Neville sobbing into his pillow for what seemed like hours. Harry couldn't think of anything to say to comfort him. He knew Neville, like himself, was dreading the dawn. What would happen when the rest of the Gryffindor found out what they'd done? At first, Gryffindors passing the giant hourglasses that recorded the house points next day thought that there had been a mistake. How could they suddenly have 150 points fewer than yesterday? And then the story started to spread. Harry Potter. The famous Harry Potter. Harry Potter, the hero of 2 Quidditch matches, had lost them all those points. Him and a couple of other stupid first years. From being one of the most popular and admired people in school, Harry was suddenly the most hated. Even Ravenclaws and Hufflepuffs turned on him because everyone had been longing to see Slytherin lose the House Cup. Everywhere Harry went, people pointed, and they didn't trouble to lower their voices as they insulted him. Slytherins, on the other hand, clapped as he walked past them, whistling and cheering. "Thanks, Potter! We owe you one!" Only Ron stood by him. They'll all forget this in a few weeks. Fred and George have lost loads of points in all the time that they've been here, and people still like them. "They've never lost 150 points in one go, though, have they?" said Harry miserably. Well, no, Harry admitted. It was a bit late to repair the damage, but Harry swore to himself not to meddle in things that weren't his business from now on. He had had it with sneaking around and spying. He felt so ashamed of himself that he went to Wood and offered to resign from the Quidditch team. "Resign?" Wood thundered. "What good'll that do? How are you going to get any points back if we can't win at Quidditch?" But even Quidditch had lost its fun. The rest of the team wouldn't speak to Harry. And if they had to speak about him, they called him the Seeker. Hermione and Neville were suffering too. They didn't have such a bad time as Harry because they weren't as well known, but nobody would speak to them either. Hermione had stopped drawing attention to herself in class, keeping her head down, working in silence. Harry was almost glad that the exams weren't far away. All the revision that he had to do kept his mind off his misery. He, Ron and Hermione kept to themselves, working late into the night, trying to remember the ingredients in complicated potions, learn charms and spells off by heart, memorise the dates of magical discoveries and goblin rebellions. Then, about a week before the exams were due to start, Harry's new resolution not to interfere in anything that didn't concern him was put to an unexpected test. Walking back from the library on his own one afternoon, he heard somebody whispering and whimpering from a classroom up ahead. As he drew closer, he heard Quirrell's voice. "No, please, not again, please." It sounded as though someone was threatening him. Harry moved closer. All right, he heard Quirrell sob. Next second, Quirrell came hurrying out of the classroom, straightening his turban. He was pale and looked as though he was about to cry. He strode out of sight, and Harry didn't think Quirrell had even noticed him. He waited until Quirrell's footsteps had disappeared, then peered into the classroom. It was empty, but the door stood ajar at the other end. Harry was halfway towards it before he remembered what he'd promised himself about not meddling. All the same, he'd have gambled 12 Philosopher's Stones that Snape had just left the room, and from what Harry had just heard, Snape would be walking with a new spring in his step. Quirrell seemed to have given in at last. Harry went back to the library where Hermione was testing Ron on astronomy. Harry told them what he'd heard. "Snape's done it then," said Ron. "If Quirrell's told him how to break his anti-dark force spell..." "Yeah, it's still Fluffy though," said Hermione. "Maybe Snape's found out how to get past him without asking Hagrid," said Ron, looking up at the thousands of books surrounding them. "I bet there's a book somewhere in here telling you how to get past a giant three-headed dog. What do we do, Harry?" In light of adventure, it was kindling again in Ron's eyes, but Hermione answered before Harry could. "Go to Dumbledore. That's what we should have done ages ago, and if we try anything ourselves, we'll be thrown out for sure." "But we've got no proof," said Harry. "Quirrell's too scared to back us up. Snape's only going to say he doesn't know how the troll got in at Halloween, and that he was nowhere near the third floor. Who do you think that they'll believe, him or us? It's not exactly a secret that we hate him. Dumbledore will think we made it up to get him sacked. Filch wouldn't help us if his life depended on it. He's too friendly with Snape, and the more students get thrown out, the better, he'll think. And don't forget, we're not supposed to know about the stone or Fluffy. That'll take a lot of explaining." Hermione looked convinced, but Ron didn't. "If we just do a bit of poking around..." "No," said Harry flatly. "We have done enough poking around." He pulled a map of Jupiter towards him and started to learn the names of its moons. tricky. Right, my lovelies. Hope you've washed your teeth, cleaned your teeth, washed your hands, and you're snuggling in for your lovely big cuddle because you deserve it. Night, night.